Joshua was a young black paramedic on leave, worked part-time at a retail store. His life as a paramedic had been adventurous until a building collapse trapped him underground for days. Diagnosed with social anxiety, his therapist recommended a part-time job to aid his recovery. Joshua started his job at the store a few days back, and it was a stressful one as he had difficulty adjusting to this new temporary job. Emily, a top consultant, woke up to an empty house and a text from her unavailable housekeeper. She headed to the store, unaware of the drama she'd bring into Joshua's life. At the store, Joshua's shift was over. He walked over to the staff office and changed into his regular fits. Done, he had gotten distracted, staring out the window, watching the free flow of cars as everyone went on with their daily business. The contrast between his adventurous life as a paramedic and his current job weighed heavily on him. He missed the rush of adrenaline, the sense of purpose, and the feeling of making a difference. Joshua's sight was interrupted by a text from his boss, which was immediately followed by a loud screech outside. An accident had just occurred. Joshua did not think twice, racing to where the incident had occurred. He knew if something wasn't done fast, it would become fatal. He asked bystanders to dial 911. With the noise, his hands became shaky out of nervousness. He knew he had to overcome his fear and help the victim. Skipping through the car's shattered glasses, he quickly assessed the situation, his trained eyes scanning the scene, looking for any signs of presence aside from the driver who he had overheard had caused the wreck. Joshua moved closer when he saw a young woman, pinned beneath the twisted metal of her car. He sprang into action to carefully make his way to the stranger's side. Speaking softly, he reassured her as he worked her out of the trapped state. Joshua had whispered some words to her to confirm her consciousness. A move of the woman's finger alerted Joshua that she was alive. She needed treatment as soon as possible. He quickly checked her vital signs, his fingers probing for any signs of injury. He stabilized her neck and back to ensure she was safe enough. Just as Joshua was finishing up, the emergency unit arrived with a stretcher. Together, they carefully loaded the woman onto the stretcher to make their way to the hospital. Joshua monitored her vital signs every step of the way. At the hospital, Joshua watched them take her to the emergency unit. Citing the doctor, Joshua briefed him about her status, letting them know she had multiple contusions and possible internal injuries. Exhausted, he had taken a seat to relieve his legs of its pain, waiting for the doctor's feedback. A little late, the doctor had returned to inform Joshua of a successful check on the young woman they had brought in. He patted Joshua for a job well done, asking him to wait till the next morning to see her as she was asleep. Too late to return home, Joshua made a decision of waiting to see her hale and hearty before taking his leave, as he found an uncomfortable chair to sit on. It was the next morning. Joshua was still at the reception awaiting a response from the doctor. Thanks to Joshua's skill, Emily had laid on her hospital bed, fast recovering from the accident. A sharp headache, the memories of the accident had come flashing. Emily had remembered making her way down to the retail store to get some utensils when she heard the sound of screeching tires, the feeling of weightlessness, and then a black man's face hovering over hers. Her mind raced with questions. Who was he? Why did he risk his life to save hers? The memories of her family's warnings about black people lingered, making her feel uneasy. The doctor had walked in, distracting Emily from recollecting as much as she could remember. Adjusting her position on the bedside, a groan had escaped her lips out of pain. The doctor had rushed to check on her to see if she was good. Noting down the change, the doctor had asked her to provide her family details. She scribbled down her parents' number while the doctor gave the nurse an instruction to bring someone in. Done with the notepad, a nurse ushered Joshua in, who had a sign of relief on his face. The doctor had introduced the young man to Emily. In his words, "Here's your hero, Emily. If Joshua hadn't found you faster, you would have lost your life or suffered severe damage worse than this." Emily had heard the doctor say. Emily's memory was indeed right. It had been a black man who had saved her from the Gussie accident. Even though Emily knew he had done nothing wrong but saved her, she felt unease as she adjusted her position on the bed further away from with the young man who had just been introduced to her. Her face had been scrunched up, with her avoiding his face, barely listening to his words. It had been a black man that had saved her. She reluctantly said thank you to Joshua, the only word she had heard clearly from him. Quickly, Emily had feigned a headache that saw Joshua excused from the room. Emily had told the doctor to ensure she was protected, mentioning she felt unsafe and unsure of Joshua, who had been brought in. She had also instructed the doctor not to allow anyone to visit her till her family arrived. This was her best solution to distance herself from her hero, who was unexpected. Joshua's introduction was met with a mix of emotions. Emily's reluctance to acknowledge his heroism was evident. With her body language, he had seen her drift as far as possible as he spoke. She had almost hit her head on her vital stand. He had rushed to help, even alongside the doctor to help, but her swift body shift when he had tried to touch her made it clear all he had read about the situation wasn't wrong. Joshua wasn't too concerned. She was just recovering, and it could be signs that were triggered from the accident. He had made his way to the store in the hospital to get some snacks after his stomach grumbled. At least Emily was safe. It had taken a lot to save her, fighting his anxiety to almost getting hit by a speeding motorcycle on his way to the scene. It was a big move for him as a black man, considering the recent situation in the community. The past weeks, the community had witnessed constant hate for blacks, which had been on the rise after the death of a 21-year-old woman who was found dead in her kitchen, severely punctured. A note had been found describing a black man as the perpetrator. The incident has turned into a huge discussion and has led to constant bullying of blacks, especially men in the community, for those weeks. The investigation had sparked the conversation when it was revealed that it was the victim's best friend, who happened to be a white man, who had carried out such an act. Calm was restored, but tension was still everywhere in the community amongst the races. A little snack in his stomach, Joshua had returned to sit on the chair at the reception. The flashbacks to how Emily had reacted came, but he waved them off once he heard his name from the nurse. The nurse needed Joshua to follow her back to the room. He had stood up, stretching his back, tired from exhaustion, curious to know what it was about. Joshua had noticed new faces upon his entrance. They all had a look of relief on their faces watching Emily. He could tell they were close relatives to the young woman. The doctor had spoken loud enough to get the attention back to him as he introduced Joshua once again as the hero who saved their daughter, but this time it made him uncomfortable with the disgusted looks that had piled on him. He had heard a belch from a woman who acted like she wanted to vomit. Others had face written with disgust, which had left the doctor shocked. The doctor's face had changed from a smiling one to a sad one. That was, he needed to confirm that his suspicion hadn't been wrong. "You called him who?" Emily's mother had asked the doctor for Joshua's hearing. The doctor's mouth, now agape, had no response to her question. Joshua had faced this a couple of times, discrimination, but it hadn't been to his face like this. It was out of character for him to stay back to receive an accolade, but he had wondered about her health and had needed a chat to inform her to call the police for the return of the items in her car. "He is no hero," another member of her family stated, with her face and tone depicting anger. Emily had covered her head in avoidance. She seemed to have expected this play to play out. Joshua could now tell why she had felt uncomfortable when he had been introduced as her hero. Joshua asked to be excused, only to be stopped by a young man at the entrance who seemed to be a part of the family. "Doctor, we should search him thoroughly. Hopefully none of my sister-in-law's properties are hidden in those clothes of his." The words had stuck to Joshua's memory. He was called a thief for what he did. His reaction hadn't been off the notice by the nurse who had watched what had happened. She had stopped him and threatened to escort him out if he continued to create a scenario. The doctor had followed him out, apologizing for how Joshua was treated. Joshua urged him not to be sorry and had shared his details in case he needed to be cleared of any suspicion that was raised. He needed to have a shower anyways. He found his way back to the store, full of disdain and anger for himself. What had happened had triggered his younger self experience while training to be a paramedic. He had struggled with doubt and racist comments when he had shared he wanted to be a paramedic at school. His classmate had laughed and called him a dumb black kid. Successfully becoming one, he had never expected the same action to be repeated as he became an adult. He had entered the store with sounds of claps echoing from staff, who had witnessed what had happened the previous day, had helped out a little with his mood. After the exchange of gratitude, he went to the staff room to clean up. Joshua had gotten a day off from his boss the moment he got back. He needed it. He packed his needs and made his way home. His way back home, he distracted himself with the views. His supervisor's call came in just in time as he arrived at his doorstep. The flashback of the text he had left open before he fled to the scene had led him to hurriedly pick up his supervisor's call. Joshua had been shocked when he had requested he resumed work. Shocked, Joshua had asked if his therapist had confirmed his well-being to his supervisor, but to his surprise, his supervisor had responded, asking if he had been out of touch with reality since the accident as a joke. Joshua, left in a shock, couldn't figure out how his supervisor got to know. The community was far away from his workplace. His supervisor had seen his video online. Someone had made a video while everything was going on and had uploaded it to a Black's community channel. Knowing well how the community operated, the news must have spread beyond the channel and made its way around the community for his supervisor to be called. Joshua ended the call thanking him for caring enough to ask him to resume, promising to revert to him on his resumption soon. Joshua's home was close to his parents' house. Even though he could have stayed at their place, he needed privacy. Joshua bumped into the couch. It was just the breathing space he needed as he remembered what had transpired at the hospital. Joshua had experienced discrimination, but he had never felt so disgusted about himself at the hospital. Did his race and color display him as a thief and wrecker? All he did was save a life. The attention that came with it, Joshua absolutely didn't care about it. Joshua's phone buzzed again, a habit the past few hours. He was tired but knew he had to respond to the call as he saw his mother's name tagged on the call. "Open up the door. We are outside the house." Joshua's mother had called him out, and he knew it was about to be a long conversation. They had seen the circulated video. Opening the door, Joshua exchanged greetings but was cut short by his mother, who had asked him one question. "Why did you butt in the scene?" Joshua had no response to what his mother had asked, unsure of why she would even ask such questions. "I am a paramedic. It's my job," he had told his mother, who had countered it, mentioning to him that he was on a break off the job. Tired, Joshua had asked his mother to give him a break from everything he had experienced today. His mother had asked again, with tears in her eyes, "Did you feel disgusted by their words, even though you did a good act?" she asked. Joshua had no reply to her question. How she knew how he felt he couldn't point out, but he knew just about what she meant. She had been there some months ago. His mother had been one of the nurses who got injured while treating patients who were affected by the riot. His mother had explained her tale of unbelief when a white kid called her an ape to her face. The kid's mother's look of satisfaction by her son's words had made her realize there was no consolation for that. His mother had left the building to the next to treat others, only to be pushed down by a patient who refused to touch him. Joshua knew this situation was a trigger for his family's experience, but he expected his family to understand. His brother had walked up to him with no smile on his face, playing a video that he recognized as the scene of the accident. He now understood why everyone was bitter about it. He hadn't realized how close it had been to being hit by a motorcycle that had sped. The video had shown how he had been avoided and denied a look until he said he was a paramedic. He had seen the older woman ask the emergency team to keep an eye on him, all of which he didn't pay attention to during the moment. Everywhere silent, his mother had broken down in tears. "I could have lost you, and these people wouldn't have cared," she had said to Joshua. Joshua knew he had to explain why he did what he did. He explained he never wanted the attention of saving a white woman. He couldn't bear not doing anything. The look on their faces showed they understood. Would they understand? His father asked, tapping him as he walked off. The question stuck in his head. His disbelief of why such discrimination existed, he couldn't fathom. Joshua had stayed up watching the video clip. He had read the comments on the post, the various arguments that had ensued, and the claims and misunderstandings that were shared. Joshua knew there was more to his action than he had assumed. His action had brought more reaction than he expected. Emily had rebuked her family a little when Joshua had left. She had expected this to happen, but she had no idea her family would have demonstrated that much reproach in his presence. She couldn't exempt herself from the claims too, since she was uncomfortable with the attention of being saved by a black man. Emily was aware of what the news would do to the community that had just witnessed riots a few months ago. Emily knew the conflict was back, and she hated having to be at the attention of a white woman who was saved by a black man. She hated how much agenda would be pushed with the storyline. Emily blamed her housekeeper, who had left to search for her groceries herself, who had gone to a luxury store first, the driver who had committed the incident that had brought attention, and Joshua, who had saved the day. Emily didn't understand why he would do that. Why would a black man save a white woman? There was a lot at stake for him. He could have been suspected of theft, or even a perpetrator, or any act for jumping into the scene. Emily didn't care for his why, but she hated that she was the center of attention for this, and not the perpetrator who caused the accident. Her mother didn't care. She had shown her an article, "See the image of that kid who you tried to shun us for. He is everywhere on the community news, and now they think they have an upper hand. We haven't forgotten the wrecks they caused in the past for months." The hatred steamed out of her mother with her loud voice. Emily's mother was referring to the incident of the murdered woman, even though she had been updated to know her black fiancé wasn't the one who murdered the victim but her best friend, who was white. Exhausted from the discussion, she had tapped her emergency button to get the attention of the nurses. The doctors arrived promptly to excuse her family away from the room. The silence hit her right. It was what she needed, at least for now. She needed her peace. She had gotten a new phone when her mother came. Everything had been set. At least they had done something right. The approach of the doctor had turned her off her mission of starting the use. The phone was taken from her as she was noted to need rest. Tired and exhausted, Emily drifted to sleep, unaware that she had a longer day ahead of her. The new day was here for both Joshua and Emily, with their hopes up for a better day as needed. Emily's family hadn't arrived yet, but she knew it would take a little time before the little peace she felt was taken away from her. The nurse had been nice enough to return her phone to her after she finally ate, but what awaited Emily wasn't what she expected. Joshua had woken up as usual, but his mood had remained the same from yesterday, a sad one. He had seen how complex yesterday was, and it didn't seem like it would be over soon with what he had read. He had prepared himself breakfast to hear a knock on his door. Opening his door, this time it was the police. Uncertain of what had warranted the visit, he had asked, "How may I help you?" "We would like to invite you for an investigation. We received a report that you might have had a hand in the accident that happened to Miss Emily on June 7th. The police had said. Joshua's reaction couldn't be contained as he let out a heavy sigh, knowing what this meant. He adjusted his mood, trying to fake a smile. He followed the police, calling out to the neighbor to inform his family. Joshua's stay at the station took hours. He had answered questions all over again to explain what had happened, and he had also mentioned the fact that the video out there already explained all that was there to it. Thankfully, Joshua had given out his statement to the police force once he got to the hospital. After hours of questioning, Joshua was let go with the condition to cooperate when he was needed. The sad mood and reality of who he was became clearer to him as he saw the look on Emily's parents' faces, with her mother screaming her need for justice, and the horror on his father's face, knowing fully well what he must have gone through. Joshua's mother had held his hands and pulled him into a hug with a stern look at Emily's, vowing to make sure everything received more attention than it had. Joshua had persuaded his mother to let it go once they got home, but she had refused and instead focused on talking to a few of her friends who had experienced such. Joshua couldn't think of anything but why one action of his had to suffer that much consequence. Emily, on the other hand, had gotten her phone back with inflow of calls to ask if she was safe and wasn't hurt. Mentioning she was good, she heard a breath of relief over the calls. She had no idea what awaited her until she received a call from her boss mentioning how he was proud that she was investigating the accident. Emily knew she wanted to get to the root of the perpetrator, who was also hospitalized, but she didn't understand why it was public news. A quick look through her messages revealed that she had seen a text one of her consultees had sent. She had opened it to see a tag to an article with an inscription of a message that read, "Is this how you treat people of other races, even when they haven't committed any crime, but be good?" The article had an headline, "The white woman takes it to the law to know if the black man, her supposed hero, had a hand in her accident." Shock and confusion. Emily had no idea as to when this happened. She hadn't anchored the investigation. Her best suspicion was her parents. She was shocked as her chest had felt pressured with uneven breathing. Pressing the emergency button, her doctor had come running. Stabilized, Emily requested her parents be off bounds for the hefty couple of hours. She knew she had to make better decisions. But then she blamed him. She would have survived. She knew. She would have been saved. Why did he have to save her to get her into this much trouble? She couldn't also help but think others must be right too about it being employed to turn the tides against the white people in the community. But she knew these were excuses she bore. The whites had always had powers and would always have. Emily hated to admit it, but she knew she was just like her parents. She had thought she was different, but the hatred she had for Joshua had been loud in her heart to hear. She knew she wanted to know if he really did it to win for his race or for the sake of humanity. But where was she to turn to? She had already been regarded as an ungrateful and disloyal child by her family when she cautioned them, but that had obviously led nowhere with the update she had just read. She needed to think and work on this fast, but she knew she had to do it fast. Joshua had finally gotten space after the experience at the police. He had gone to his room after he came back from the station and got it shut to prevent any disturbances. He had a lot to think about. His experience so far had been horrible. His therapist had a whole lot to do. Little wonder how his little panic attacks hadn't visited once during this time. He had been disgusted by the thoughts and actions of people, more shocked at how the educated fellas had reacted to the situation. Even some of his own people had described him as a sellout to them when he read the comments. To them had prioritized the whites over the blacks. Joshua had thought hard about how that had been a conversation in the first place, but he couldn't do anything about it anyway. So all he has to do is sit still and watch, and hopefully he doesn't regret that act of saving. What would he do to solve this? Joshua knew at this point he had no answers. The only answer lay in the hands of Emily, who was the only person to clear him of the accusations. How to get her to do this was also a problem. She had sent the police invite to him. If he stepped close to her, he was sure he wouldn't be picked up for trespassing and claimed to hurt her. More than ever, Joshua felt frustrated at the situation and knew he had no power as a black man. The next line of thought for Joshua was to resume work, but knowing the situation, going back to work makes life more complicated. The thoughts of how to escape this reality struck Joshua as he found his way to the bed. The next few days weren't the easiest of days for Joshua, as the incident had become community news. He had taken a break from his part-time job, which was understandable to his boss, who was up to date with the news. His boss had also called him to pause the resumption, as it seemed tensions were rising. Joshua could tell everyone was on their peak to burst. Emily had gotten better, but there was a lot to focus on. She had allowed her parents to visit her, but it had resulted in no good. She still needed a personal conviction on her next step. She was getting released from the hospital today. She needed the storm settled before she thought about work. Emily had gotten her space to herself, returning back home, as her housekeeper had returned. She had gotten herself some books to help lift the weight she felt, but she still hadn't properly said thank you to her saver. She knew he at least deserved that little from her, but that would take a lot from her. Emily had ordered books that centered on identity, discrimination, prejudice, and groups. She had seen on the internet that it would help her figure out what it meant to her, and even him, who were both the center of attention. She had seen the backlashes on him. She wouldn't agree less that he had gone through multiple trials than she has based on his decision. She reads the books and begins to educate herself on racism and prejudice. Her action, though nonverbal, had been a form of microaggression to Joshua. He had faced racism and discrimination from her family. He had been subjected to systemic racism, all at the expense of saving a woman's life. It was time for her to take that step. How then does she go about it? As a consultant, she had various connections. Emily reached out to her friend who worked at the newspaper, mentioning her need to share the story. Joshua had rougher days, no work, no company but therapy. His mother had called several times to know if he was good, but he lied to her but he wasn't. As days went by, he had more conversations with his therapist virtually, which helped relieve the panic attacks he had experienced while alone. Joshua's concern about getting hurt if he left his room grew. Even with therapy, his anxiety was back and worse than before. The days seemed harder to pass by for Joshua. He had to do something about the situation outside talking to his therapist. He called the doctor to help out with Emily's number. Joshua knew it was a stretch on a line that could either make or break him, but he knew he had to do something. He got the number, and he dialed. "Hello, who am I speaking to?" It was time to face the music was finally here, and Joshua hoped it brought great tidings. He introduced himself to Emily, and her response waved off the feeling of disgust he had expected from her. Rather, her tone had been receptive. He was surprised but yet relieved. He didn't have to worry about the call so far, knowing fully well he might not be in trouble for this. Joshua had absolutely no idea what to say next. He proceeded to ask about her health, a response that led to the next conversation that they had. He knew this was either going to break him or mend him. His therapist had suggested he wait a while to not lose sanity, but he knew he had to do this now. If he didn't, the tension would break out from just a conversation and could possibly incite violence that had taken time to be placed to rest. "We need to talk about the incident. I know you have been up to date with the happenings, at least from the invitation I got from the police. You are well aware of the situation." Joshua had rambled his thoughts out on the call. Emily was happy Joshua had called to discuss. Something had to be done sooner, but she wished she had contacted him first. She had been a coward, running away from taking responsibility for her actions. Joshua had explained the situation and how bad it had been for him and his daily life. He mentioned to Emily knowing he would be in trouble if this conversation didn't go well with her because, as much as he wouldn't want to agree, he knew it was true. Emily, on the other hand, had sketched out a plan, and Joshua's call was all she needed to start ticking off her to-do list. Emily to-do list. Write a piece in the newspaper addressing the issues and educating people about racism and privilege. Privilege. Have an official release on her media pages to address the issues, and finally thanking her hero for saving her. Joshua didn't know this, but Emily did and was ready to start working on it. The call ended with Emily letting Joshua know she understood him and would get back to him soon. Joshua's calmness restored the moment the call ended. He had finally done something about it. He had taken the first step. The next step was to face his reality, concentrate on therapy, and finally get the courage to step out after a while. The next few weeks weren't one to be joked with for Joshua. He focused thoroughly on therapy to get his confidence back. He started reading more about people and their psychology. He explored understanding more of human behavior, asking why from his therapist and finding answers to questions he had. He also watched a lot of videos to get him fully back to being a paramedic, and his boss took time to brief him on the recent adjustment at the workplace. Joshua felt comfortable with the amount of investment he made on himself. He did until an article was released, but this time it wasn't targeted at anyone but himself. His details were out in public, his workplace and role, and the incident that had made him take a part-time job. Only someone close could have done that. How did anyone know his details, especially his injury? It was kept a secret from even his mother. The article berated him. At this point, he knew he could no longer just look. Joshua reported the article as cyberbullying to the police, hoping they would at least do something about it. The obstacles were now obvious, but Joshua took this opportunity to share positivity. First, he stepped out of his house to join a cleanup event in his community. He also volunteered as a teacher for a one-day event for a health program. He visited his parents to have a conversation and watched everything play out. Seeing that doing more for the community brought more ease for him, Joshua started planning out community workshops that prompted unity. He knew that was one way to get everyone together. At least he was sure his own community was interested in his story, so he took advantage of that to share the positive side of the story, where he felt like a superhero after saving someone from danger. At this point, his community reservations had reduced, but there was still nothing yet from Emily. He had taken it losing to the whites once more as a black. Joshua started getting invitations to speak to young black men on how to build a great life as a black child. He shared his career path and journey in his healthcare work. He shared his trials too, and how his workspace had been the support system he needed after the collapse incident. Joshua used this opportunity to address the article that was out and encourage them to seek peace and remain positive on all grounds. Joshua's enthusiasm didn't reduce as he got invited to speak to young blacks, understanding that racism isn't the best way to go and ensuring they continually show the best representation as blacks in the community. Emily had seen the article on Joshua's service on the local news channel. It was time to talk. She had delayed doing that so much that she sent out the piece she had been holding on to for a month. She had been skeptical about the reception, but it had to be done. Emily took to her social media platforms to address the situation, explaining what prejudice Joshua had to face because he had saved her and the backlash Ian's caused him and even herself. Emily pointed out how systematic racism had been a part of her without knowing until this incident where she felt uncomfortable and past microaggression because a black man saved her. Her release apologizes to Joshua and endeavors for both communities to work together to achieve unity, fighting off prejudice and racism altogether. Emily had been scared of the outcome of the release. Her parents had called some hours after the statement, and she had asked them to visit her to share whatever grievances she had concerning her approach. The visit had seen Emily share with her family her real truth. She called them out for ignoring the fact that she had made it alive and focused on discrimination instead of being grateful she was there alive to see her family. She mentioned putting themselves in the shoes of Joshua and his family, and after that investigation by the police of her elder brother, they had done just that. The look on their faces wasn't explainable, but she hoped they understood her. They had their bosses left, but they did get her since her mother changed the subject to family time. A week later, her writing was ready to be released by the local newspaper. It was condemning racism openly and once again thanking Joshua for saving her. She was a consultant, and she knew just how much it meant to clients if they had obstacles, just like Joshua did. It did destabilize them. When Joshua saw the release, he was relieved, not excited that he had to go through this for that to happen, but he knew the incident was the perfect avenue to educate everyone on important issues like racism. It took a little while for Emily to see since she came from a privilege for being white, but he appreciated it. It filled the little hole of a lack of feeling represented as a black man. Joshua was aware that weapons stood against him. He knew, but he was much more aware that these needed to be fought against. His experience had taught him just that. He had to create the change he wanted by educating everyone on the importance of abstaining from racism and showing how everyone, regardless of their race and color, deserved a chance of being respected. Joshua did receive a call from Emily, who asked if he had seen her releases. Emily let him know how grateful she was and hoped they could walk her on the part of discovering the signs of unity she had missed. Emily had asked for an opportunity to repay him financially, but Joshua had refused. He had asked that she aid in the funding of scholarships for community members who needed them. Emily felt disgusted by her actions and respected Joshua for his reactions. Motivated to be a part of his mission of educating their community on racism and its anomalies, they both drew a calendar to help them achieve this with their schedules as they both returned to their regular lives at work. Joshua and Emily became allies in the fight against prejudice and discrimination. Their experience had made the little obstacles on the way a little easier compared to what had happened. The black man and the white man, who had been the center of attention for the past month, working together was surprising yet intriguing. Joshua was aware that people were curious about the real truth, so they shared and let everyone know what teamwork was all about. Joshua and Emily took it up a notch, organizing joint community events that purely educated people on the societal topics that affected their day-to-day lives. These gave the perfect avenue for others to share their stories. The black and the white were all seated, listening to each other, and seeing how far these traits had been instilled in them was eye-opening. And they both knew it was the beginning of healing for everyone who had experienced and watched it happen to someone they loved. The community became less tense, and Joshua could see the little exchanges between the two races were happening. Everyone was less skeptical about their interactions. In the end, Emily emerged from this experience a changed person. She realized that her prejudices were not only harmful to others but also blinded her to see the goodness in people like Joshua. She learned to embrace diversity and confront her biases. It was not an easy journey to go through for her, but all in all, it was the change that Emily knew she needed. She was able to gain a meaningful insight into true heroism, which is exemplified by Joshua, a character who is not white but is brave nonetheless. And as she thought of that day, she realized that Joshua had saved her in more than one way. Joshua was the one who had saved her from herself. For Joshua, he knew the job wasn't done yet, but it was a starting point, and a little part of him hoped that many more people didn't go through this anymore. He had emerged stronger, more confident, and more determined to make a difference. It had given him a renewed sense of purpose. Joshua had returned to work, and he had continued to serve and protect his community, inspiring others with his courage and compassion. His encounter with Emily had been a turning point, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is always hope for forgiveness, redemption, and transformation. And as Joshua looked to the future, he knew that he would always stand tall, a beacon of hope and a true hero. For now, he would tell his story and how he won. Prejudice and racism have played a big role in distorting unity among communities. The preconceived idea that one's color determines how they are treated has been caused by a lot of societal factors that have dug deep into the hearts of many. Joshua's story sparked a beacon of hope in the community. During an interview with the local channel, he emphasized the need for positive change. "We must create a world where kindness transcends race," he said to the local channel. The community began to heal, with small exchanges and interactions becoming less skeptical. Joshua knew there was still much work to be done, but he saw progress. His personal journey, though marred by discrimination and backlash, had become a catalyst for change. He had faced prejudice head-on, and his resilience inspired others. Joshua's experience showed that even in the darkest moments, hope and positivity can prevail. The story highlights the destructive nature of racism and prejudice, perpetuated by societal factors. Joshua's courage and selflessness demonstrate the power of individual actions in challenging these biases. Joshua's positivity had opened him up to so many obstacles, showing how key it is to be an exemplary representation of oneself regardless of who they are. He opened the door to working out a solution in his capacity to ensure that anti-racism receives awareness. His experience through his eyes became other people's eyes and effected changes in at least one person, Emily, whom he had saved. Joshua and Emily's resolution symbolizes the potential for unity and growth. They recognize that consistent effort can rewrite the narrative on racism. It may take time, but together they can create a world where a black man saving a white woman is seen as a heroic act, not a controversial one. The community must work together to dismantle systemic racism, fostering mutual respect and inclusivity. By challenging stereotypes and promoting equality, we can build a brighter future for generations to come. Joshua's story serves as a call to action, inspiring us to become the change we want to see. Together, we can create a society that values and cherishes every individual, regardless of race, color, or disability.